see the word transformation, what comes to your mind? So maybe you're like Steve, you really like nature, you really get excited about nature, and what you see, is that what comes to your mind when you think about transformation? That's a beautiful example of transformation. I'm an avid gardener too, so I see a lot of butterflies and I nurture them. But maybe at home you have 6-year-old little boys, or maybe at heart you're a 6-year-old little boy yourself. And when you think about transformation, you think more about something like that. Is that what comes to mind? That's a different side of transformation. Well, as Matt said, my background is technology and science. And when I think about transformation, what I think about is a transformative power of technology. Deep down, I'll make a confession. I'm a geek. I'm a nerd. I really like technology. I have a subscription to Wired magazine. I don't admit this in public often, but I do. I like to read about technology. I like to learn about technology. I like to talk about technology. So let's do a quick show of hands. How many of you consider yourself geeks, nerds, or techies? Oh, we do have a few. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes, Carmelo is. How many of you own a smartphone? How many of you own just a regular cell phone? How many of you don't have either one? Okay, so none of you are, in fact, not techies. Because if you have either a regular cell phone or a smartphone, you have in your pocket more technologies than NASA had in 1969 when they put a man on the moon. If recently you sent a birthday card that sang happy birthday, or if you received a birthday card that sang happy birthday, you had more computing power in that card that you either threw in the trash or put in some drawer somewhere somebody special sent it. You had more technology on that ship than the Allied forces and the German forces had in 1945. They would literally have killed for their happy birthday card. So even though we may not think of us as techies or nerds, we are really power users of technology. And technology has changed everything we do and the way we do it. And I would say it has even changed the way we are humans and we work with each other. And I'll give you some examples of that. Now we can look at the numbers, 35,000 likes every minute. 35,000 likes every minute. Wrap your head around that. This chart is about 1 year old, actually 2 years old. And when it says there will be 6.4 billion in social network being spent, and there will be, and I can't quite read the number for that, something, I forget how many there will be in the future, but that number has changed so quickly. Today, Facebook is valuated as over 140 billion. That's just Facebook. So the numbers are just staggering. But maybe more important than the numbers, we sometimes say a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's probably worth 1 million numbers, especially to people who don't like technology. This is a picture of the last two introductions of the popes. The top one is Pope Benedict, and there are a couple of people in the corner there with cell phones. I probably thought they were very cool at the time. This is 2013, when Pope Francis was introduced. This is the actual picture. Now, I said I was a techie. I'm an engineer by training. I'm a scientist. I'm also an optimist. And there are a lot of people that would talk to you about, kids and technology today, they spend all their time looking at their cell phone. They waste so much time on Facebook or on Instagram and whatever the latest one is. I actually think that technology has had an amazingly positive impact on society and on what it means to be human. What are these people doing here in 2013? They are sharing a really exciting moment. They are so excited to be there for the introduction of the new Pope, and they are sharing it with everybody around them, with their friends, with their family who can't be there. Social networks have really introduced deeper connections rather than making it harder, as some people believe. In fact, in my opinion, if you take something like Facebook, what it has done is it has reintroduced the village. I grew up in a small village in the east part of France, and we literally knew everybody. We were not very close friends with everybody, but we'd run to people into the bakery when we went to get the bread, and we knew who their kids were, where they were going to school, if they had gone on vacation. We knew all of that. We had a lot of shallow but important connection that built our network, and you talked about the network. These were important. We lost a lot of them because some people like me moved half the way across the world. A lot of them are extremely mobile, and we lost this connection. Facebook brought that back for me because I was able to reconnect with all of my friends and family in France, again, at a shallow level, but now I know when their kids get into college, when they go on vacation, either having a new job or a bad day job. And that level of humanness, of bringing back this constant network of people that matter is very important. And in a way, we had lost that in a very mobile society. Facebook brought that back. So I think it is, on the whole, very positive. But the impact of technology is certainly even more important when you start looking at people who are facing either physical or developmental or ability challenges. If you look at what technology has done for people who have physical disabilities, it is truly remarkable. I have a daughter, my oldest daughter, has type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed when she was 12, and actually she was in intensive care for about a day. I put on 10 years for that day. It was very stressful, as you can imagine. But I remember that she was in intensive care. She had all kinds of tubes attached to her and monitors, and the pediatrics endocrinologist walked in, didn't even look at us, the parent, looked at Claire and said, "So you've got the diabetes, that sucks. It means that you cannot pilot a commercial airliner, and you cannot drive an 18-wheeler across the Washington Bridge." The way I think these laws have changed, but it was true at the time. Said, so you can't do these two things. Anything else you don't do, it's your own fault. Don't go blaming the diabetes. And the reason he was able to say that, it was a very powerful message. He was telling her, don't let this define you. And he was telling us, the parents, don't put that child in a bubble. Let her be who she can be. But the reason he was able to say that to Claire is because of the technology such as the insulin pump, such as the continuous glucose monitor, marvels of engineering, who have taken a disease that 100 years ago was 100% fatal. I can barely even talk about that part, but was 100% fatal and has turned that disease into basically a massive annoyance. Still really annoying to have diabetes, by the way. Your pancreas does a wonderful job. You don't spend enough of your day marveling about your pancreas. But this being said, what it is now is an annoyance. By the way, my daughter took that advice to heart. She's now a professor of computer science at Carnegie Mellon University, so she's in Pittsburgh too. So I am very, very proud of her and try to place this fact in every conversation. If you look at some other physical issues, ALS is still a lot more than an annoyance, Lou Gehrig's disease. But what technology has done to that, I took that quote from Steve Gleason's website. Steve Gleason used to be a linebacker for the New Orleans Saints until he developed ALS. And what he means by until there is a cure, technology is a cure, is there is a lot that he physically cannot do anymore. He cannot talk to his children. He cannot go and walk to the table and sit at the dinner table. But what technology can do for him is give him a voice so that until he can still type, he can type so that his tablet can talk to his children, so that his wheelchair can go where he wants to do, and he can still be as independent as possible. If you look at Stephen Hawkins, a brilliant physicist who has had ALS for, I think, over 50 years now, and has had a very full life with a disease that until, honestly, very recently, would have completely shut him down. But his brain was still functioning, and with just a twitch of an eye, he can control the computer and write groundbreaking physics paper. These are really technologies that have changed the life at a very profound level with people who are still dealing with very strong physical science. Let me give you actually a last example of what technology has done for people with physical challenges. My other daughter, Emily, used to date a young man who has Treacher-Collins syndrome. If you're not familiar with Treacher-Collins, it's genetic mutations that causes craniofacial malformation, including children being born without cheekbones, without chins, often without ear or ear holes. So they are born deaf, amongst other issues, just because the sound cannot go through. So of course, he had to have a lot of reconstructive surgery, and through amazing technology, they were able to build a system so that since the inner ear function, it can make the bone vibrate so that he can, in fact, hear completely normally. So, as I said, she used to date this young man because a couple of months ago he dumped her. And he told her that they had very few interests in common, and he thought her interests were boring. So think about what technology did with this young man, for this young man. It took a very, very difficult physical challenge and made it possible for him to behave like any other 20-something young man and be a complete jackass. Isn't technology awesome? I mean, really. So this is the physical. What about developmental challenge? Why is it that we've been able to do so much on the physical side, and honestly, we are trailing behind on the developmental? And the reason is the brain is so complicated. We are just starting to understand how the brain functions. And Kettering actually had this quote, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." So if you're missing an arm, we know what the problem is. You need something to replace the arm. And whether you replace it with a hook or with a very sophisticated DECA system, it's basically just engineering. Now, the problem with DECA, we have built this amazing artificial arm that can actually grab a bottle without crushing it. You need exactly the right pressure, connect it to the brain so that you can send the signal directly. Would probably not like me describing it as just engineering. But it is, because you know what you're trying to do. It is just an engineering problem. It is an amazing piece of engineering, but you know what you're trying to fix. If you're dealing with an individual who has non-communicative autism, what are you trying to fix? We cannot even define normal when we talk about the brain. When we talk about an arm, we can define normal. It is having an arm. When you have type 1 diabetes, we can define normal. It is having a pancreas that does what it's supposed to do. If you're non-communicative, we don't know what normal looks like. And if we don't know that, how do we help? There used to be in the psychiatry field or in neuroscience, there is a syndrome called Capgras syndrome, sometimes called Impostor Syndrome. It's when people get convinced that all of their loved ones have been taken over, sometime by spies, sometime by aliens. So until very recently, these people were described as crazy. They were crazy. Crazy is not a useful diagnosis. It just doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you deal with them. It certainly doesn't help them deal with it. Now we actually know what's wrong in that syndrome. What's wrong is that when you store the memory of a loved one in your brain, you store two things. You store the physical attribute of the person, the way they look, the way they sound in one part of your brain, and then you store the emotional response to this person somewhere else in your brain. And when you see your child, these two signals have to get together, and it says, this is somebody who looks like my child, and I am responding emotionally to that as my child, so it is my child. If there has been a trauma to the brain where that connection is broken and the two parts of the brain cannot connect, what happens is you look at the child and you say, this person looks like my child. But you have no emotional response to the person, and so the only logical explanation is Somebody has taken over the appearance of my child. These people are not crazy. They're in fact very logical based on the way the brain functions. So there is, by the way, no treatment yet, but having now understood what's wrong with the person, there is a hope for treatment for that. And we are getting to this point now at understanding the brain well enough that we can start helping people. You may remember in 1994, IBM built a computer that beat Kasparov at chess. Kasparov was not terribly gracious about losing, by the way. At the time, it was touted as a great achievement in technology. It made the top 10 in David Letterman. It was quoted on Jay Leno. It was a great achievement. Looking at it now, this was really easy because chess is completely rules-based. We can write down every single rule of how it's played, and what it takes to play chess against a human is just a bigger computer that can run all the possibilities as fast as possible. So because we can describe the problem very clearly, it is easy to solve. A couple of years ago, IBM beat another game when they played Jeopardy. Jeopardy is a lot harder to do, and that's why we name it the birth of cognitive computing. The reason Jeopardy is harder is that it's all about understanding the subtlety of the human language. The human language and how we understand each other is amazingly difficult. I'll give you one quick example. I can talk to you completely out of context. So if I say out of context, time flies like an arrow. It's not a very deep sentence. Time flies like an arrow. What did your brain just go through to understand what I said? It went through the fact that there are horseflies and fruit flies, but there are no time flies. So flies is not an insect, it's a verb. That flies do not like nor dislike arrows, so like is not a verb. That arrows fly and time passes, but when time passes fast, it is said to fly. You took all of that, you filtered out the French accent, time flies like an arrow. That is an amazing achievement that we cannot write down the rules on how we did this. So when they played Jeopardy, actually, in the second game, if you watched it, the last question, the computer won, by the way, but the last question, the double Jeopardy question, was, this city has two airports. The category was US cities. That's important, US cities. The question was, this city has two airports, one named after a World War II battle, one named after a World War II hero. The answer, by the way, is Chicago, Midway and O'Hare. The computer answered Toronto, which is a stunningly wrong answer, considering that it had displayed flashes of brilliance before in some of the answers it gave. Toronto, how did it get Toronto in a category that is US cities? It got Toronto because it had been trained to know that if you're familiar with the game Jeopardy, the category is often a play on word, or it's tongue-in-cheek, or it has some irony in it. So it had been trained not to take the category too seriously. We as human beings, we know right away, if you look at a category called US city, you know it's not a play on word, it's not tongue-in-cheek, and it's not ironic. It's a US city. But if you look at Toronto, you look at Wikipedia, the Encyclopedia Britannica, everything it was analyzing, Toronto is a US-like city. It's a US neighboring city. Certainly the words come together a lot. So to the computers, that made sense. This kind of subtlety is something we are barely starting to scratch the surface. However, we are scratching the surface. The point is, the computer won. So we are starting to understand how the brain analyzes to that kind of level. And once we have that, then maybe we can help people who have that Capgras syndrome, bring the memory together, or maybe we can at least define what it is that we can do to help somebody who is not communicative. What are they trying to express? Is there a way for us to break through? But we need to first be able to define normal. What do we want people to be able to do? And then we need to be able to understand what it is that they want to do and be able to help them. There is fabulous work being done at Columbia University right now using robots to help people build new neural pathway. So this is a person who had a stroke 3.5 years ago. And so 3.5 years ago is a long term for a stroke. People tend to think that after about 6 months, they cannot regain more ability. What the robot is doing here is measuring the gait. There is one leg that's not working as well as the other. It's measuring the gait and modeling what it looks like. And then it does 15 sessions where the robot shows on the screen what the gait should look like, and then the exoskeleton forces the leg to do it that way. If you click on the third one, on the same one, that's after 15 sessions. Again, 3.5 years after the stroke. And what you can see is that first a much more normal gait and a much faster gait. What is amazing about that, this is not physical therapy in the way we understand it. It's not just trying to get the joint to work better. What it has done here is build new neural pathways so that the brain knows how to tell the leg to move a specific way. And being able, this ability to have the very flexible brains that can relearn even after a stroke, and even in this case, I think it's a 62-year-old man, when we thought we couldn't do that anymore, is really changing the way we're thinking about how we can help people. And now they are actually doing some work with children. In this case, it's a child with cerebral palsy. If you can click on the video there. What they are doing is giving them what they call haptic joysticks. So it's, of course, it's a wheelchair. But the joystick senses and teaches the child how to maneuver, so that if the child cannot quite get it the first time, the joystick will very slightly push it one way or the other to teach the child how to use it, so that, and this is really the exciting part, so that this child can participate, can be in the classroom with the other children, can build the connections that are so important, and be part of the classroom. This is the way we are going to include people. If a child cannot physically participate, by definition, he or she will be left in a corner. And again, here, it's more than just giving a fancy wheelchair. It's really building pathways so that the brain can learn different ways to maneuver. So I really think that the future is here, that we already know, those of you who work with individuals with autism, for example, that tablets are wonderful tools for communication, for learning, that somehow there is such power there that is just starting to be tapped. People are playing with new apps. Can people communicate with them better? Can we help them learn how to use them? And there is such great technology to help people stay independent or regain independence, either due to physical disability or developmental disability. So Stephen also had a glass half full. It's funny, we all think the same. The glass half full, in my case, it's because I said I was an engineer and I was an optimist. And we all know people see the glass half full if they're optimists and half empty if they're pessimists. If they are optimistic engineers, what I see here is a glass that can hold twice as much water as it is holding now. And I think that's where we are right now. I think that through technology, we, as the people who work and love and teach the individuals who have disabilities, we can do twice as much with them. I think society can benefit 10 times as much through technology from the connections we're building and from the participation of the individuals. And I do think that they can benefit 100 times by being able to really be with us and really be including and do as much as they can. And so I'm going to be here for most of the conference, and I hope to be able to talk to a lot of them. I'm very, very happy to be at YAI, and I think we have a great future in front of us. Thank you.